Okay, I think we'll get started while people continue to arrive. So good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this session on tackling urban heat islands and extreme temperatures and how cities are implementing climate shelters and other solutions. I'm Trisha Hackett, and I'm a senior sustainable urban development expert for IURC North America, and I'm joining you today from Medellin in Colombia, where I live. Before we go any further, I have a request. We'd love to know where you're joining us from. So please write in the chat box your organization, city, title, department if it's relevant, kind of know who's in the virtual room. And also as a reminder, this session is being recorded, and the link will be shared afterward with presentations to all the attendees. The International Urban and Regional Cooperation Programme is financed by the European Union, and it brings together EU and global cities to share learning and experiences on sustainable urban development. Challenges that range from sustainable mobility to urban regeneration to supporting cities move towards a more circular economy, and topic that is going to be covered in this session, nature-based solutions. The metropolitan area of Barcelona and the city of Boston and the Northern Virginia Regional Commission have been collaborating together over the last nearly 2 years on a range of topics. And in fact, this was going to be a closed session, but we decided to open it up and make it a webinar, as we know this topic is relevant for our wider cohort of cities and metropolitan areas. This is our final session before the summer break, which we will address what we're living with across both continents represented in this collaboration, but not just North America and Europe, in many parts of the world, nearly in every part of the world, I guess we can say. Record high temperatures and heat waves are becoming increasingly frequent and intense, making frontline headlines almost daily. I just wanted to share something really quickly that you can see that this is from yesterday's newspaper in my hometown in central Illinois, and it really struck me related to this session today. I think that's a big question for us. Will these heat plans be enough? I'm from a conservative part of central Illinois, and what struck me about having this be a front page headline is that it's also talking about inequality as a significant challenge, which is not something that very often appears in this local newspaper. So, I mean, these challenges are really going mainstream, even in places which normally wouldn't be talking about heat plans. Normally, these would be kind of a nerdy topic for these webinars and for urban planners and people who work in cities, but it's gone far beyond that. So stop sharing that now. These heat waves are exacerbated by urban heat islands, which is probably also a term that will become more well known outside of the nerdy planning circles. It's a phenomenon which occurs on urban areas much hotter than the surrounding undeveloped areas. As we said in the invitation, i.e. too much concrete and too few trees and green spaces. I think most people could understand and experience that, what that means in cities. And this is a second in our IURC North America Masterclass on nature-based solutions. And we're very fortunate to have with us today experts from the city of Boston and the metropolitan area of Barcelona, two cities who are really lighthouses and leaders in urban innovation and equity and a whole mobility, a whole range of topics. So it's really a privilege to have both of these cities represented here today and willing to share what they're working on these specific solutions and this topic, such as cooling spaces, increasing vegetation, urban parks, and how these interventions are being identified and implemented. And also importantly, talking about what's hard about implementing these implementations, what barriers have they found and are overcoming, because I think that's how we learn, is also hearing about what things have been tough. So before I turn over to our first presenter, I want to remind our guests in the webinar, so please don't forget to put any questions that you have as we go along in the Q&A box. We'll either answer them live later on in the session, or our presenters can answer them in writing in the box. So we'd like to have these as interactive as possible. So please add your comments in the chat and your questions in the Q&A box. So I'll stop there for now, and it's my pleasure to introduce Zoe Davis, who's a climate resilient manager for the city of Boston. She will tell you a bit more about that role there, and we'll really look forward to her presentation. So over to you, Zoe.
Excellent, thank you so much. Are you all able to see my screen before I continue? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to share a bit about Boston's work with you all. As Tricia mentioned, I'm Zoe Davis. I'm a project manager with City of Boston's Environment Department. I work specifically on the Climate Ready Boston team, on the Climate Ready initiative for the city. This is the city's plan to prepare for the impacts of climate change, and the team focuses on resilience and adaptation, climate resilience and adaptation. Within the team, my work focuses on extreme heat. So I'm going to share a bit about that work with you today. I'm also joined by my colleague, Kat Eschel. She's chief of staff for the Energy, Environment, and Open Space Cabinet, and so she may jump in during our conversation today. Alrighty, so yeah, I'm going to discuss a bit about what Boston is doing with respect to our cooling center program, and then some of the smaller pilot programs that we have recently undertaken over the past couple of years. And so as we implement heat resilience strategies like cooling shelters and more broadly networks of cooling, these are some of the guiding questions that inform how we do so. Looking at how we can protect all of our residents from extreme heat while also addressing inequities in heat exposure, sensitivities that exacerbate heat exposure, and then adaptive capacity to access cooling. So first, I'll provide a bit of a background on the city's heat plan, talk a bit about heat risk in Boston, and then finally I'll touch on some of those implementation projects. So as background here, in 2022, Boston released the heat plan. So this is a citywide plan to prepare for hotter summers, and it has a focus on environmental justice neighborhoods in Boston. So this includes communities of color, areas with lower income households, and areas where there are households with lower English proficiency. And so I'm going to touch on those areas a little later in the presentation. But the heat plan provides a framework for all of the types of strategies that build heat resilience in Boston, will reduce heat risk, and it is part of Climate Ready's initiative to prepare for climate impacts. So it's in line with the other parts of the Climate Ready initiative associated with stormwater, coastal flooding, and focuses on extreme temperatures. But in Boston, when we're talking about heat resilience, this means ensuring that people, buildings, and infrastructure are prepared, and ensuring that all of our residents and other stakeholders have the resources that they need to stay cool and safe during the summer months. And it also means reducing temperatures in hotspots throughout the city. So moving straight into the strategies broadly across the heat plan, there are 26 strategies to increase access to cooling resources and reduce localized extreme temperatures. What you're seeing here are the layers, these 8 layers of different approaches where the strategies are sort of nested within. The first row includes more operational communications and awareness-based strategies, and the second row is associated with those that will reduce localized extreme temperatures and address heat associated with buildings, parks, streets, and how we can integrate zoning to support that. But I would like to turn your attention to this one highlighted strategy in red, providing cooling during heat waves. And within that strategy, or within that layer, this strategy called enhancing the network of cooling. So this is a strategy around building out a citywide cooling network. And so here, the term cooling network we use fairly broadly. It can refer to a communications network, a programmatic network, but also a network of physical spaces, both indoor and outdoor. For now, though, I'm going to focus on the networks of physical spaces in Boston. But overall, the goal here with this strategy is to ensure that we're increasing access to cooling spaces. One, by increasing awareness about them. Where are they? What are the services that are provided? And enhancing the capacity of the existing cooling spaces. And then finally, identifying new ways or places to provide cooling. Okay, our existing network of cooling spaces. First, I'll share a bit of a baseline about extreme heat in Boston, just to give you a picture. So what you're seeing here is the daytime air temperature in degrees Fahrenheit on the left-hand side, and then the heat duration in the number of hours. Sticking with the daytime temperatures map on the left, what you're seeing here are trends that follow areas that have higher building density, expansive hardscape, areas that are more solar exposed. You may notice that our transportation corridors in our major arteries have higher temperatures than the surrounding areas. And looking then at our heat event duration map, where this includes extreme temperatures that are higher than 95 degrees in the daytime and don't get lower than 75 degrees in the evening. The trends here primarily follow denser parts of the city to the northeast, but the coastal areas and areas in the southwest, which are typically higher in tree canopy coverage and lower in building density, are able to cool down over time. But it's important to note here that all of the city of Boston gets extremely hot during heat waves. So blue only means just slightly cooler, but during heat waves can still be above 90 degrees. So as we implement heat resilient strategies, also identifying the areas of social vulnerability alongside extreme heat risk, this is going to help us ensure that we are addressing the needs of residents who experience the greatest impacts of extreme heat alongside compounding impacts, socioeconomic impacts. So following the development of these temperature maps, we also conducted an analysis using what's called the Homeowners Loan Corporation map. We used the map of 1938 alongside extreme heat and land coverage metrics. And this was to better understand the impacts of historic development practices on the spatial distribution of extreme temperatures. And so just as a bit of a background, the Homeowners Loan Corporation map was used previously in the 30s and 40s to rate the riskiness of mortgage lending. And this was largely based on race. These determinations was largely based on race. And so it limited where, especially people of color, lower income communities could essentially receive loans and build wealth. So that has essentially influenced where the structure of development in the city. What you're seeing here is the comparison of those 4 grades relative to heat duration. And so just by visual comparison, you can see that there's a stark contrast between the areas that were graded best or still desirable in the city versus areas that were graded hazardous. This is showing a breakdown of the heat metrics that we are looking at. The daytime, nighttime temperatures, as well as the land surface temperature and urban heat islands index, and then our green space metrics as well, looking at parkland, percent tree canopy, percent impervious surface. The takeaway here again is that areas that were graded best or still desirable are overall cooler. And what we have seen is up almost 8 degrees cooler in the daytime and almost 4 degrees cooler at night. And in addition, areas that are graded or that were graded best or still desirable previously now have up to 20% more parkland and 40% more tree canopy coverage. And so this information is informing how we're thinking about the implementation of our heat resilient strategies overall. But this is just to show the specific areas in the plan that we focused on based on this cross-section of social vulnerability, historic disinvestment, and extreme heat risk. So moving on to our actual shelters, our cooling shelters are a core part of our existing response to extreme heat events. What you're seeing here is the heat duration map, that same heat duration map, but this is now the network of our local community centers. They're called the Boston Centers for Youth and Families, the BCYFs. A select list of these locations is identified for each summer and then confirmed for each heat event. And on your left, this is just to share a bit about the procedure and thresholds here, where the Public Health Commission and the Office of Emergency Management will work together to monitor temperatures over time and keep the community centers as well as other departments informed on whether a declaration will be made, and also serves to provide counsel for the mayor's office on whether an alert declaration should be made. So if so, then residents will be informed and other stakeholders will be informed of the cooling centers that are available. And just to clarify, the circles that you're seeing are the 5-minute and 10-minute walk sheds going towards these locations. But the cooling network in Boston is a bit more expansive than that. This is an image of both our indoor and some of our outdoor public facilities that we use, not just during extreme heat events, but are open outside of those events. But this includes the cooling centers, but also our libraries, as well as outdoor spaces, both city and state owned, and then specifically our tot sprays. You may notice some gaps in the network, particularly in the central and western parts of the city that are sort of this lighter bluish green. These are actually parks and water bodies that are a combination of city, state owned and maintained. They're just not captured in this layer, but they are definitely a part of our cooling network. And so this is just an image of our 10-minute walk shed to some of these spaces. Okay, and so moving into some of the ways that we're expanding our network of cooling spaces, while we do have geographic coverage, it's still important for us to increase accessibility in cooling spaces. So I'm going to share a couple of those programs quickly. This is an example of our pop-up cooling kit program. The purpose of this was to provide a bit of a mobile resource for community-based organizations that are hosting their own events during the summer. So the program was set up such that folks could reach out and apply for a kit and receive this at their event, and they're responsible for maintaining it, taking care of it until they return it again. So much like checking out a book at a library. And the purpose of this was to provide actually misting during events. So it was really great to see some good feedback from community members on like what their experience was accessing this resource, ways that we can improve it, because it was a very clunky resource, but folks have been asking for it again this year as well. And the final project I'll share is our cool spots and outdoor spaces at libraries. This was a program that we began during COVID quarantine to ensure that folks, even though they couldn't come into the library at the time, or there was limited access into the library, this would ensure that there's space outside of the library to safely engage, but also included some other resources for residents and a bit of a hub to reconnect during that time. So I will conclude there, but I'm looking forward to hearing from colleagues in Barcelona and to discuss further with y'all afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for that really comprehensive presentation. And as always, I know that Boston is so conscientious about including equity or trying to include equity in almost everything that you do. And this is an issue where that is so important. And I really like the pop-up cooling stations. I think as these heat events are happening, so even outside of the normal hot summer days, that we expect us to be able to be agile and to respond to communities and to reach more people. That seems like a great project. So thank you so much for that, and really look forward to hearing now from Barcelona, having a discussion later, seeing how comparing how both of the cities are kind of this transatlantic lens on how they approach to these similar issues. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our three next speakers from the metropolitan area of Barcelona, and they'll each tell you a bit more about what they're doing in their roles in the metropolitan area. So our first presentation is going to be Minerva Campos Sanchez, who's a technical expert at the Climate Emergency and Environmental Education Department. She will be followed by Sara Pereira Init, architect working on the environmental sustainability plan. And finally, we're going to have Margarita Espinosa Torredermer, who is a sustainability coordinator of the sustainability protocol at the Public Space Department in the Metropolitan Area of Barcelona. So over to you in Barcelona, Minerva.
Thank you very much. I'm sharing my presentation. Can you?
It's not in presentation mode yet, Minerva.
Yeah, now?
Yes, perfect. Great.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Yes, as you already said, Tricia, this is a three-part presentation. I will start by introducing the Metropolitan Climate Shelter Network, and then my colleagues will explain the design of new climate shelters and also the sustainability criteria applied to the projects. So our approach is actually pretty similar from the just Zoe present from Boston. At the metropolitan level, we have the Climate Change Vulnerability Index, which is an index that helps us to identify where the potential hazards are concentrated. And in this way, we can see where the vulnerable people lives. So in terms of where to or how to address public policy related to adaptation, this is really important for us for the allocation of climate shelters. As you can see, one of the key components that conforms this index is the lack of green spaces. as well and other socioeconomic variables. So when we decided to start to working with this topic of climate shelters, the logical starting point was to make an exploratory study. So we started by doing a benchmarking to see what's happening in other cities and regions of the world. From this first step, we define the criteria and the main typologies, and we identified that potentially public facilities and private facilities such theaters or cinemas. Also, some schools can work as climate shelters, and of course, urban parks. So we also define the minimum size of green areas, the minimum size of green areas that we determines 0.5 hectares, over 0.5 hectares, and normalized difference vegetation index of 0.4. We also overlap the information related to vulnerable population, considering people over 65 years old and children from 0 to 5. With this information, we calculate the distance, the walking distance at 10 and 15 minutes walking to these different potential climate shelters. And we were able to see that at the metropolitan level, and there are a lot of potential spaces, indoor and outdoor spaces that can work. So in this slide, you can see the evolution of the climate shelter network. As I already mentioned, we made this a study of potentiality. And one interesting conclusion of this study was that we realized that a lot of parks and green areas did not achieve the conditions to offer thermal comfort to the population. So we decided to identify the bioclimatic guidelines, and we published this bioclimatic criteria guide to improve the quality of parks, which is these criteria actually are part of the criteria that the architects of public space are applying to the design of new climate shelters, and Sarah will explain this later. So in 2020, we presented these results to the different city councils of the metropolitan area, and we made a voluntary call to create the network. So we started in 2021 with 7 municipalities and 20 climate shelters. This year, we have 11 municipalities and 74 climate shelters. And now we are having conversations with another 4 municipalities. So probably in 2024 will be 15 municipalities. So a very important thing I would like to highlight the different alliances and collaboration agreements that we have created during these years. A very important one is the collaboration with the telecare service for elderly people that make us possible to have a direct contact with this part of the most vulnerable population. Another very important collaboration agreement for us is the one that we have with the Environmental Science and Technology Institute that help us to make research in different topics around the climate shelters. We also have a graphic image. We made every year a communication campaign to inform about the starting of the climate shelter season. And we also have with our environmental, as part of our environmental program, environmental education program, we offer talks to the vulnerable people and also training to facilitate support staff. So as part of the work that we made when we received a new request from the city councils to include a new climate shelter to the network, is a very detailed analysis of the space. This is an example of the analysis that we made for one park that actually already belongs to the network. So we check that that all the criteria that we previously identified and select during the study really works in this space. So I just already mentioned another important thing for us is to improve the knowledge that we have related to which are the variables that are determining thermal comfort, and do that for instance, with the last year we tested small parks, and we realized that these small parks, smaller of 0.5 hectares, can provide thermal comfort in a very similar way than bigger parks. We applied the UTC index, the Universal Thermal Comfort Index, and we could see that inside and outside of the parks, the range of temperatures actually is really different. Another important event from that happened during this year in 2021 was the creation of an investment plan to promote sustainable projects at the metropolitan level. So with this program, with a total budget of 100 million euros, one of the 15 lines was the creation of new climate shelter. So in the coming years, we will have an investment that will reach around a little bit more of 6 million euros. And this is some of these examples of these projects are what Sarah will explain later. Thank you.
Okay, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I also wanted to thank you for inviting us for this webinar. And in my case, I'm going to explain you about small-scale climate shelters we are developing in the metropolitan area of Barcelona. I want to explain you a little bit about it. Okay, next. At the moment, we're working on these 8 climate shelters in public space. And further on, I'm going to explain you 2 of them, as Illes Balears Badia and 13 Roses Square in Viladecans, as 2 examples of projects located in very different conditions. Yes, these are the ones that just were remarked. So our workflow is based on like 4 points. We first of all select multidisciplinary teams through design competitions and create teams that where we have urban and landscape designers, biology and environmental sciences, bioengineers, and simulation experts. We develop preliminary designs with bioclimatic strategies. We we make environmental simulations with the software EnviMed, and then we develop the projects. The bioclimatic criteria we rely on to achieve thermal comfort on our climate shelters are based on like basically on 4 points. It's location, vegetation, water, and materials. In locations, we look for multi-shadow sites and analyze wind conditions and airflow. In vegetation, we try to maximize dense vegetation capable of evapotranspiration. And water, we try to bring water next to our climate shelters by placing fountains, naturally sized water ponds, or water playgrounds. And with materials, we always try to choose the ones with low albedo and basically draining pavements. Here we incorporated 3 historical references of our architecture, our Mediterranean architecture, where you can clearly identify solutions to these criteria. These are solutions that nowadays we somehow lost in public space, and we see now that we have to recover them and as well parameterize them. But somehow we're not inventing anything. We have to recover solutions that we in the past also used. Next. Okay, so as I told you before, I'm going to explain you a little bit about two of the climate shelters we're working on. One of them is Illes Balears Park in Badia. This project is located in a quite propitious conditions because it's located in a park of more or less 18,000 square meters, but it is covered by a low density of old pine trees. The project is being led by the team Carles Enric Studio, who chose to concentrate this climate shelter in this remarked circle of 1,000 square meters. Next. The 5 strategies that to develop these projects have been first to focus the action at the lowest point of the topography of this park. So we saw that we can maximize the collection of rainwater. Second, we generated we chose to generate central living space under the shade by improving the accessibility to this new area, incorporating furniture, incorporating playgrounds. Then next, the third point was to generate shade under the pine trees with a vegetated pergola, which allows temperature and humidity to be stratified. The fourth was to establish draining areas that allow to incorporate also wet vegetation. And the last and the next, the fifth point was to plant a variety of deciduous trees and to consider the vegetation evolution in the next 30 years. So we could analyze how it would make better conditions of this place. Next, this project we simulated with the EnviMed tool. We modeled the park without the vegetated pergola, which is the project, and then with the vegetated pergola. Is there a next one? Yes, with this simulation, the results of the UTSI and the PET index, which you see on the sheet, showed that this project, incorporating this vegetated pergola, we could reduce an average of 3 degrees this area in the whole park. So next. The other climate shelter we are working on is 13 Rosas Square in Viladecans. This project is located in a completely different situation, the very adverse conditions. As you can see, it's a square of 3,500 square meters, more or less, which is built over an underground parking. And as you see, it's all concrete, no vegetation, no shelters, no shadow, very, very adverse conditions. In this case, the project is led by Matalta Studio, who chose to concentrate the climate shelter in a surface of 2,300 square meters. And next, in this case, the strategies, the 4 strategies that we used to develop these projects were: first, we evaluated the structural capacity of the existing square, because we had to be able to optimize the layout of earth that needs to grow correctly the vegetation. In the three photographies we incorporated, you can see similar projects of the same team that were also built over on a roof of a building, and where you see that vegetation grows properly. Next, the second strategy is to design an artificial urban landscape by identifying the pedestrian circulations, and in the places that are rest, we designed flower beds and other living areas. The third point next. The third point is to incorporate water as an element to play with, and at the same time as a thermal regulator. And the fourth point, and the last, is to incorporate a light vegetated structure that covers the whole square, like a bioclimatic canopy, to concentrate the maximum shade and humidity. And well, this is the last strategy and the end of my brief explanation of the small-scale shelters we are developing in the metropolitan area of Barcelona.
Hello, I am going to present now the sustainability protocol. Besides all these projects and all these climate shelter criteria that we saw with the previous presentation, we have a sustainability protocol that we apply to all the projects and works that we do. We mostly do, 75% of the projects we do are public space projects, so including parks, streets, and places. And some of the places or parks are considered climate shelters, but the rest of the projects that are not considered climate shelters, we also apply some criteria in order to avoid the heat island effect and to promote green surfaces. Okay, so next please, Minerva. This is the protocol. No, sorry, the previous one. This is the protocol. We have the quick guide in English in our website because the full version it's only in Spanish and Catalan. And it's divided into 19 criteria regarding transversal analysis and follow-up of the project. So to establish, in order to establish the strategy. And then it takes into consideration energy, materials, water, comfort and health, and site sustainability. Next, please. So I'm only gonna focus on 2 of the 19 criteria because are the ones related to climate shelters. In order to avoid the heat island effect, what we do is to limit the impermeable surface exposed to the sun on the 21st of June at 1 p.m. because this is the midday astronomic time. So we limit impermeable surface because construction materials are retaining a lot more heat than permeable materials and then natural materials. So what you can see in orange, it's the limitation of the surface exposed to the sun, the impermeable one. And what you see in different kinds of blue, the light blue is the shade of the building and the trees. And the darker blue is either permeable pavement or green. This way we promote a series of strategies that could help to refresh our cities. Can you go to the next, please? Yeah, this is the limits we established depending on the kind of project. Streets, it's a 70% of permeable, impermeable pavement exposed to the sun. we must mostly work on very little streets in the central part of the city, in which it's very difficult sometimes to put green or to have shade. So what we want to make sure is to be able to get to these limits in most of the projects possible. But of course, even if this limit can seem not very restrictive, depending on the project, we always go to the best solution and to reduce as much as possible the heat retention. So in squares, we have a 45% and parks 25% of the impermeable surface exposed to the sun. And for buildings, we have also different limits for roofs and facades with greatest exposure. And we can go to the next point. Yes. Another one of the 19 criteria in our protocol is a minimum of green surface. We measure it with two different indicators. One is the green coverage, which is like if we count the green overlap of all the layers, as you can see in your left. And in the right, you can see the sum of vegetation limits. We set a different limit for this indicator, as we are adding all the surface of the different layers. And in both cases, we are measuring related to the project surface area. Okay, so in streets, as this example shows, in streets, it's the same limit for green coverage and the sum of vegetation layers, because in streets, there's lots of things happening, like parking entrances, etc., that don't allow us to have a sum of vegetation layers a lot higher than the green coverage. But if we go to the next slide, please, we can see we set different limits for both indicators for also buildings, squares, and parks. And here you can see that, for example, in parks, green coverage, as parks are used for many different activities, we cannot have 100% park covered in green, but yes, we can have the sum of vegetation layers for 100%. So same criteria for the squares and buildings. For the moment, we are not making it mandatory to build a green roof, because it's not possible to make it mandatory everywhere, because there's cases in which the building is too old and we could not put that weight, etc. So we put a 20% of some of vegetation layers, so that we put green somewhere, either in the facade or the balconies or the roof. Like this, it's more flexible. So next, please. Yeah, thank you very much for listening to us. And this is our presentation for the metropolitan area of Barcelona.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Minerva, Sarah, and Margarita. Margarita, I think you still might be sharing your screen.
Sorry?
I think you might still be sharing your screen.
I think it's Minerva. Yeah, I'm sharing. Sorry, I didn't realize.
That's okay. No, it's okay.
How do I stop doing?
No, I think it's okay now.
It's okay? Okay.
Great.
Perfect.
So, wow, that was, you know, in 20 minutes, an incredible amount of information, very comprehensive, and great that that sustainability protocol is available in English, and we'll share that link as well in the follow-up email. And I mean, just very impressive, the comprehensive nature of the work that you're doing, and in a world where we have limited resources, you know, that the data and evidence base is so important, both to know, you know, what kinds of interventions and where to do them, and whether or not they're working, and you know, what and projections into the future, looking at vegetation, you know, 30 years down the road. So congratulations to the great work that you're doing in Barcelona. And you know, these these sessions are always, you know, they're always kind of too short and a lot of information. But the idea is, I'd say that to use a Spanish reference, it's kind of a tapas, where you get lots of bits of different information. And I know looking at the thanks for sharing that, Margarita. I know that looking at the participants who are here, we have Mark Cowdert from Austin and Karina Richter from Windsor in Canada, and I just two people that I know in the audience who this is a topic that they work with really deeply. And so the idea is that we can, you know, use this as a platform to create connections, and we know that you're all very generous and open in terms of connecting with other experts and colleagues working in the area to follow up and ask questions and provide more information. And that's what we're here for, is to help make those connections between you, because we know it's too much information in too little time in some ways. But you know, it's great to be able to have the big picture, and also about some of the specific interventions you're doing, and you know, changing that roof of that concrete. You know, I talked at the top of the session about too much concrete and too few trees and green spaces, and you showed some great interventions there that you're doing to change that. So we have some time now for some question and answers. We have for Zoe, the first question we have from Shahrzad Garabagi. Probably didn't pronounce that right. I'm not sure which city you're coming from, but the question for Zoe was, do you have any plans for communities or neighborhoods to lead projects to increase their resilience to extreme heat? Which I think is a really interesting question, and that balance between, you know, we talked about data and evidence, the balance between the qualitative, you know, the quantitative and the qualitative, and how important that social inclusion and community participation element is, I know, for both cities. That's directed to you, Zoe.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a really interesting one. What I will say is, what we have seen, especially over the last couple of years, COVID has been a really great example of seeing how communities know how to take care of one another, and how the city can support. And so there are many communities that actually have those processes in place and that do sort of their own planning, whether it's like resilience planning or thinking about housing, open space, what have you. So for example, Chinatown is one where they do have their like own master planning process. And so I think it's really a matter of like the city and our teams identifying the ways that we can support, because we know that communities will continue to take care of one another, and it's really identifying what is the capacity building element that we can provide. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Zoe. How about if we directed that that same question to the Barcelona side, in terms of how communities and neighborhoods can lead or co-lead projects to increase their resilience to extreme heat?
For who is the break?
Sorry,
me?
for I was just asking. Yeah, it could be for you. I'm not sure on the Barcelona side, but just the community participation element to how cities in your plans are, or in your projects, how cities, how communities and citizens can be actively involved in increasing their own resilience to extreme heat.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Yeah, at the metropolitan level, yeah, is for us is a big challenge because you know we are 36 municipalities, so we don't have we're trying to plan in this territorial perspective, but then are the city councils which have a very direct contact with the people, and each one of these councils that are part of the metropolitan area have, not everyone, but almost all have their own adaptation plan. So from at the metropolitan level, we are trying to promote these activities and this more strategic planification. And of course, our colleagues from the public space department can really focus on specific projects that can have a direct effect. Improving the public space, of course, is a very key part of this to improve the thermal comfort of people in all our cities. We are living in the Mediterranean area. Is a very vulnerable region, as you already know. We have very hot summers, and in the metropolitan area, we are very dense cities with and with this lack of vegetation. So we have to think in different innovative ways to try to improve this thermal comfort. And yes, and I saw another question related to how to know the when the last one related to the people that go to the climate shelters.
Yeah.
For us, it's extremely difficult to know because of the climate shelters activated are libraries or civic cultural centers that actually are working with the normal functioning. So we don't know how to differentiate between the people that is just looking for to be safe and more with a more thermal comfort, in a more thermal comfort situation, or the people that actually is using this facility. We have been thinking a lot, but it's a challenge for us to try to work on this topic.
That's a really interesting point, because a lot of them have, at least a double use, libraries, for example. So I guess it would require having having local staff kind of surveying users about, are they there for the books or the air conditioning, or both? Zoe, I see you're nodding, and Kat. So something similar. Would you like to respond to that from the Boston side?
Sure, Kat, you want to jump in? You look ready.
Yeah, I was just smiling because it's something similar that we experience. We actually do have staff that do those surveys, but it turns out that relatively few people are going to those services just to sit in an air-conditioned room. Obviously, we have that set up with, like, a place to sit, magazines, water. And so if people wanted to go and just sit in a cool room, they could absolutely use the Center for Youth and Families in that way. But typically they're actually combining the services. So by and large, it means that you actually might undersell the utility of these cooling centers as cooling centers, because by and large, that's not the one reason why people are going. And people might not even sort of realize that that's the reason why they're going. A lot of people might go to a cinema because they know it's going to be a cool, dark space, but they're not conscientiously making the choice of, oh, it's a heat emergency, let me go to the cinema because it's cool. It's sort of an add-on benefit. And so if you were to track people that use cooling centers, the numbers are actually quite low, but the people that use those services overall, quite high.
So that's so the next question is about what are the challenges for implementing the climate shelter. So I guess that would relate to kind of dedicated spaces that are not a library, for example, or a youth center. Maybe it could include these pop-up spaces, but we'll pop back over to Barcelona. So what are the challenges around implementing, I guess in this case, kind of dedicated use climate shelters? Is it around letting people know, or distances, or maybe even perceptions that that's a place where only a specific kind of person goes? I'm just guessing.
Yeah, probably to arrive to the most vulnerable people, because if we think a very quick way to communicate for probably will be our web site or from Instagram or Twitter. But if you are thinking in the people over 65 years old, probably is not the channel that they used to be informed. And so we made an alternative communication campaign with by radio, and we made also some flyers, and we distributed in markets and libraries and health centers, trying to think where the most the people that really need this kind of service probably can help this information. Has been very important is coordination with the telecare service, because they made a lot of calls they talk directly with the elderly women and men that live alone and probably don't have this network of that help them to find some that can help directly to them. So by using this service has been really important for us to arrive to these people.
And thank you, Minerva. And what about on the Boston side?
Some of the challenges. I think when we think about like expanding like physical spaces and even like programmatic elements of cooling, there's always a question around like around the resources to do so. So whether it's like the physical space in a building or like the staff to cover that expansion. So one of the things that we've been thinking about is, and it's been touched on in this conversation, but one of the things that we've been thinking about is how we can best partner with other organizations, whether they're community-based organizations, nonprofits, and even private businesses as well. So one thing that we have been doing this summer is more so focusing on communication networks communication networks to expand messaging and awareness around cooling resources in partnership with a nonprofit organization, but also an organization that's well connected with other sorts of institutions across the city. So whether they're academic institutions, cultural institutions, or private businesses. The goal with this, it is a pilot. So the goal with this pilot is to disperse information about heat resources through workforce networks. So almost as if you'd be receiving like an HR message from a supervisor from the HR department. We're encouraging organizations in partnership with these other organizations we're working with to find the best way to disperse that type of information for their company, for their group of people that they work with. You know, it's an effort to say this is a serious public health issue. This is like talking about your health benefits, like to raise it to that level of awareness for folks.
A very kind of tailored approach. Makes sense. There's an interesting comment, Mark Coyer from Austin, Texas, which if you've seen the news is very hot these days. He said that they surveyed folks in Austin about cooling centers there, and they were more likely to go shopping in the grocery store, mall, probably cinema as well, than to go to a cooling center because the cooling center are boring. So I guess which kind of begs the question of, in terms of in the investment of, you're talking about limited resources, whether the investment is then to make the cooling centers less boring. So maybe there's something else that's happening at the cooling center besides just being cool, but some activities that's happening there, or those resources should instead be invested in maybe mitigation efforts, so more around vegetation, or those are the kind of the hard trade-off decisions that cities think increasingly have to make. But cooling centers are boring. So that's an interesting. Thanks for adding that, Mark. I think we have a few minutes left, and we have Susanna, if you want to pop up, we have a minted, just a 2-question poll for those of you who are still with us. So there are the instructions.
And also the link is in the chat. So if you want to just click there, you can start answering.
You can click on the link, or so the first question of the poll is: has your city suffered from extreme temperatures in the last year? We have about well, with the speakers, about 31 people who are with us, about 25 who are participating. So it seems like the answer is very much yes. Popping up from those who've answered, and I think, yeah, I think it's going to be, unfortunately, probably around 100%, if not now, very, very soon, either extreme heat or extreme cold. Should we go to the next question, Susanna? And this is where we're hoping to have a bit of interaction here. So share a specific project your city is implementing to tackle extreme temperatures. So I know there are those of you who are with us who are working specifically on this topic. So maybe your cities are doing something innovative, interesting, you'd like to share. It would be good to just test the waters, what other cities or metropolitan areas are doing. Cool corridors. I don't know what a cool corridor is. I mean, I could guess, but I don't know specifically. Climate shelters and libraries. Okay. Whoever put the cool corridor, maybe you could explain a little bit what that is in the chat, whether that's about vegetation, I imagine, creating micro cool islands. Heat hotline, heat hotline for elderly people to check in on them and provide shopping, etc. Labor rights, regreening the cities. Ephemeral elements of shade. Okay, ephemeral elements of shade. Conducting workshops with service providers and organization to survey current protective measures and support needed. Redesigning parks and playgrounds to be thermally comfort. Splash pads, artificial shade, utilizing mature green space, placing water sprinklers. Wow, you're all ready with these solutions. This is great. Using nature-based solutions, green infrastructure and public space. Examples for communities, creating a green infrastructure manual. Misting stations attached to fire hydrants. Good urban comfort that's been included in public spaces. Drinking fountains, going back to old schools, drinking fountains. Great to see drinking fountains coming back in so many places. Super blocks, they're wonderful super blocks. Oh, these are great. Thank you so much. You're ready to share your ideas. Technical regulation for the use of green infrastructure, improving the urban tree canopy, get like drinking fountains, good old fashioned trees. Free transit passes during heat waves. We're seeing more and more cities doing free transit passes. Wonderful. Thank you all for jumping in. We don't do Minties all that often, so it's nice to have leaving cities. Yeah. that's one option for some people. Urban sea park, de-sealing. Great. Mark is saying cool corridors are rethinking transportation corridors in low-income communities that are shade-starved. This includes adding more trees, crosswalks, belt shelters, and a lot of this places on adjacent property. So it's a very comprehensive approach.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we're thinking of in Boston. We have some federal grants to rethink a couple of our corridors in Roxbury. That was one of those environmental justice communities that Zoe had displayed on the map. But to integrate green infrastructure, tree canopy expansion, cooler bus shelter designs, and trying to have it be a complete street, not just from a vision zero and safety standpoint and sort of part of large mobility mode shift, but also creating a model to have deeper integration of the resilience aspects. So hoping to start work on that soon, and really excited about it, but absolutely. Thanks for adding that in, Mark.
Oh, great. Thanks, Kat, for that. Wonderful. I love it. We try to have these sessions be participatory, and sometimes we succeed. So thank you for oh, here we have one, not forcing people off at the end of the transit route, allowing them to continue to ride. Oh, okay. Yeah, very much an equity issue there. This has been a great session and couldn't be more timely. So thank you so much from Boston side, Zoe and Kat, and Barcelona, Minerva, Farah, and Margarita for these great presentations. I know you put a lot of effort into the presentations, to creating them and really thinking about it. We had several conversations before the session. So we appreciate your time and effort, and thank you for those of us, those in the audience for joining us, and hopefully that this will be a spark for making more connections between our cities. And we're already talking internally that, you know, maybe we'll have a follow-up, kind of more of a working session, because I think, you know, there's so many of you who are working on these topics in a very technical aspect, and it might be interesting to have a session that's more of a peer kind of working group where you can dive a little deeper in I think that might be of interest. So we'll test that out. Yeah, just thank you all very much for on the presentation side and the presenter side, and from the audience, and Susanna and Colm and David and the rest of the team from IURC for making this happen. And of course, the European Union. We were really the ones who are making this happen. So we appreciate oh, and before we go, there's also, we'd love to have you fill out, there's a 2-minute survey. Susanna just very kindly put the link in the chat. It's really helpful for us to hear from you, what you liked, what could do better, what you'd like to see more of. So if you could take 2 minutes and fill in the survey, we'll also send the link in the follow-up email with the presentations and the recording of the webinar. So thank you all very much. Have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, evening. It's been a pleasure to spend this hour and 15 minutes together. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Stay cool.
Thank you. Stay cool.
Bye.
Indeed.
Stay cool.